I think I sort of approach that with anything that I pour my heart into and create is you've done everything you can.
Relationships once under strain are being tested again, and every move Harry makes now carries serious weight. Something drew him back into the palace, and the consequences can no longer be dismissed. The unexpected arrival. The overnight security officer at the royal palace noticed a black Range Rover approaching Windsor Castle through a rarely used gate shortly after 11:00 p.m. The vehicle proceeded slowly along a private service road linking staff housing and maintenance areas. The driver presented valid credentials and security codes that allowed immediate entry without routine checkpoint inspections. The gates opened, and the vehicle vanished into the shadows of the castle grounds. Prince Harry stepped out from the rear passenger seat, dressed in dark clothing with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His personal security officer stayed close as they moved quickly toward a side entrance typically reserved for senior staff. The door opened from inside before they arrived. Someone had clearly been monitoring and expecting their arrival. Harry passed through the doorway and continued directly into the private corridors of the historic building. The night cleaning staff continued their normal rounds through the state rooms. At midnight, one worker pushing a supply cart near the private quarters noticed lights on in a room that usually stayed dark at that hour. Voices could be faintly heard through a partially open door. The worker recognized the deeper voice of an older man speaking, but could not identify the second voice replying. The discussion sounded intense and serious rather than casual. Another staff member setting up breakfast service areas before dawn noticed unfamiliar security officers stationed in parts of the castle that were normally quiet overnight. Extra protection personnel stood alert near entrances leading to private family wings. Their presence suggested someone important had arrived without the advance notice that normally accompanied royal visits. The officer on duty declined to answer questions about the heightened security measures. The early morning shift brought more staff into working areas of the castle. Employees exchanged puzzled looks and whispered about the unusual overnight activity. Someone mentioned seeing a vehicle with darkened windows parked in the private family courtyard. Another reported hearing footsteps and voices in the king's private study well past midnight. These details began forming a picture of a secret visitor as a household manager conducting routine morning checks noticed fresh coffee cups and used glasses in the king's private sitting room. These items had not been present during the final evening inspection. Someone had clearly spent a significant amount of time there overnight. The manager also observed that specific security protocols had been activated in patterns used to protect high-ranking family members rather than routine nighttime coverage. By 7:00 a.m., word had quietly spread among palace staff that Prince Harry had somehow arrived at Windsor Castle without any public notice or official schedule. The information passed discreetly between trusted colleagues aware of the sensitivity of unannounced royal movements. Everyone understood that such secrecy pointed to private family matters rather than official business or public engagements. The realization created an atmosphere of heightened alertness throughout working areas. Staff members carried out their duties carefully, avoiding areas where private discussions might still be ongoing. Security officers remained stationed at key access points. The arrangements confirmed that Harry was still somewhere inside the castle despite daylight approaching. Kitchen staff preparing breakfast noticed that orders for the king's private dining room included servings for 2 people instead of the single portion Charles usually requested in the early morning. The listed dietary preferences matched known details about Harry's eating habits. This practical sign erased any remaining doubt about the identity of the overnight visitor. The morning continued with Harry still hidden within private family quarters. His vehicle remained parked in the secured courtyard away from public view. Palace officials issued no statements or acknowledgements regarding unexpected visitors despite growing staff awareness. The careful suppression of information reflected the serious importance of keeping Harry's presence confidential. Senior staff began assessing the implications of the secret visit. Harry had not entered a royal residence in England for many months. His sudden appearance without Meghan or their children pointed to urgent family business rather than a casual stay. The late-night arrival and extreme security precautions suggested discussions too sensitive for phone calls or video meetings. Something significant was unfolding behind Windsor Castle's ancient walls. Knowledge of Harry's secret return spread through quiet whispers rather than open conversation. Everyone involved understood their professional duty to protect royal privacy. Still, awareness of such an extraordinary meeting created an undercurrent of tension and curiosity throughout the palace. The coming hours would decide whether this reunion remained hidden or erupted into public view. The real reason behind the visit. King Charles sat behind the large mahogany desk in his private study when a knock announced someone's presence. Harry entered and settled into the leather chair across from him. The room carried the scent of old books and furniture polish. Heavy curtains blocked outside views. A single lamp cast warm light, creating shadows along walls lined with family photographs and paintings. The king slid a folder of documents across the desk toward his younger son. Harry opened it and began reviewing pages filled with legal language and financial records. The documents outlined properties and assets tied to royal estates. Some pages detailed trusts and inheritance arrangements intended to pass through generations. Charles explained specific clauses while Harry carefully examined each page. The discussion stayed formal and focused on practical issues rather than emotions. The conversation moved to upcoming royal events scheduled over the coming months. Charles shared his ideas for modernizing traditions while preserving essential ceremonial responsibilities. He described gaps in the family's public presence as members reduced workloads or stepped back from active service. Harry listened quietly as his father laid out arguments about duty and legacy. Charles spoke openly about declining health concerns and the possibility that his remaining years might be fewer than hoped. He discussed the growing responsibility placed on William and Catherine to carry the institution forward. The king acknowledged that the younger generation would need support and that unity within the family would become increasingly vital. He suggested that Harry could contribute in a defined role without resuming full-time duties or relocating permanently to England. Harry replied with questions about how such an arrangement would realistically work. He raised concerns about media scrutiny and public reaction given recent history. Charles presented plans developed by palace advisors to gradually restore Harry's public image through selective charitable efforts and limited ceremonial appearances. These proposals included clear limits and defined expectations. The conversation turned to financial matters. Charles explained income streams and property rights still linked to Harry's position within the family despite his move to America. Certain assets required regular review and approvals from multiple family members. Harry learned that decisions made during his absence had impacted his children's future inheritances. These revelations added urgency to his involvement in managing family estates. Charles produced additional documents describing proposed changes to existing agreements. He explained how these revisions would protect Harry's interests while honoring his decision to live independently. The changes required Harry's approval and signatures on several legal forms. Charles had clearly prepared extensively with guidance from lawyers and financial advisors. Every detail had been carefully considered. Harry took time to thoroughly read each document. He asked for clarification on specific provisions and their long-term effects. Charles answered openly without pressure or manipulation. The tone remained respectful yet serious as both men recognized the importance of the decisions. Hours passed as they worked through the complex material. The king eventually steered the conversation into more personal territory. He spoke of regrets and lost chances for family connection. Charles expressed a desire to know his grandchildren better and to mend relationships damaged by public pressure. He admitted mistakes on both sides while stressing hope for gradual healing. His words were measured but appeared sincere rather than scripted. Harry shared his own perspective on events that led him away from royal life. He described pressures that felt overwhelming and security concerns he believed had been overlooked. Charles listened without becoming defensive. He acknowledged some of Harry's experiences while offering alternative explanations for others. Exchange stayed calm despite addressing painful topics. The conversation returned to practical matters as both men recognized they had covered enough emotional ground for one night. Charles outlined next steps requiring future meetings and continued private discussion. He suggested a tentative timeline for additional talks over the coming months. Harry said he was willing to consider the proposals, but insisted he needed time to review everything carefully and discuss matters with Meghan before committing. Charles accepted these terms while emphasizing that some decisions were time-sensitive. Certain legal deadlines and event schedules created unavoidable pressure points. Harry understood but refused to rush decisions affecting his family's future. The meeting ended with both men acknowledging progress, even though full resolution remained distant. The discussion concluded around 3:00 a.m. Charles and Harry stood and shook hands formally. The gesture carried meaning beyond simple contact. They had spoken directly and honestly about issues left unaddressed for years. Whether this conversation would lead to lasting reconciliation or temporary cooperation remained uncertain as Harry prepared to decide. Harry's unusual behavior. Harry left the morning meeting and moved through palace corridors with an uncommon sense of purpose. Staff noticed him heading toward areas of Windsor Castle rich in history but rarely used by royals. His route led away from public spaces toward private rooms filled with family memories. Palace workers exchanged looks, but maintained professional silence as required. A housekeeper saw Harry enter a room closed for renovations years earlier. The space remained mostly unchanged from his childhood visits despite modernization plans. Dust covers shielded furniture that had hosted decades of family gatherings. Harry moved through the room touching surfaces and studying objects tied to his youth. His actions suggested a search for meaning rather than physical items. Security staff monitored his movements through internal systems without intervening. Royal family members retained access to most palace areas regardless of current status. Harry's path followed memory rather than logic, jumping between locations linked by emotion instead of layout. He spent several minutes in a small library where family photos lined the walls in chronological order. Kitchen staff noticed Harry walking through service corridors normally used only by employees. His presence in these working spaces disrupted usual royal patterns. He paused to observe doorways and staircases that offered behind-the-scenes access to formal rooms. Viewing familiar spaces from service areas provided a different perspective. Harry appeared to be rebuilding a mental map of the palace from multiple angles. A maintenance worker encountered Harry on an upper floor unused for years. He was examining portraits of ancestors spanning generations. The paintings had remained in place for decades, witnessing family conflicts and institutional change. Harry studied faces and read nameplates carefully. His focus on ancestry and lineage seemed intentional. Administrative staff saw Harry enter the office suite housing royal archives. He requested access to specific records related to family history and protocol precedents. Archivists supplied the materials according to procedure while noting the unusual request. Harry spent more than an hour reviewing documents and writing notes in a personal journal. His research centered on status, titles, and inheritance traditions. Palace workers whispered about the odd nature of his movements. His actions did not resemble typical family visits or official responsibilities. The mix of childhood rooms, service corridors, historical records, and ancestral portraits suggested someone reassessing their relationship with the institution itself. Staff sensed something important was unfolding even if its meaning was unclear. Harry visited the private chapel used for family christenings and small ceremonies away from public view. He sat alone in silence for nearly 30 minutes. Chapel staff kept respectful distance while remaining aware of his presence. The spiritual aspect of his journey added depth to what already felt like a personal pilgrimage. Security logs recorded every movement throughout the morning. The record showed Harry accessing more areas in one visit than most family members entered over months. His extensive tour suggested either final goodbyes or renewed belonging. Interpretation depended on outcomes from ongoing private discussions. Staff working in residential areas noticed Harry pausing outside doors of rooms occupied by other family members. He did not knock or enter, but stood quietly as if weighing whether to make contact. These moments of hesitation revealed inner conflict between his intentions for visiting and the complex relationships that made certain conversations impossible. A senior household manager gathered observations from several staff members into a confidential report. The document was scheduled for review by officials responsible for security procedures and family affairs. Harry's unusual conduct needed to be recorded, even though it broke no formal rules. The palace functioned by closely monitoring patterns and noting departures from what was typical or expected. Harry's movement through palace rooms continued throughout the morning hours. His route eventually guided him back toward the residential wing where he was staying. Staff members resumed normal responsibilities while reflecting on what they had witnessed. The strange morning revealed a man torn between identities, seeking connection to the places and history that shaped him while living a life removed from those very roots. William discovers the truth. Prince William arrived at his office in Kensington Palace shortly after 8:00 a.m. His private secretary stood near the door with an expression that immediately signaled troubling news. The aide carefully closed the door before speaking. He explained that reliable sources had confirmed Prince Harry's presence at Windsor Castle. The visit had begun late the previous night and appeared to be continuing into the morning. William froze as he absorbed the information, his jaw tightening and his hands briefly clenching at his sides. He asked sharply who had known in advance and why he had not been informed. The secretary admitted the visit had been arranged in total secrecy. King Charles had personally overseen all logistics. No one outside a very small circle had been told about Harry's arrival. The Prince of Wales immediately instructed his secretary to contact Windsor Castle and request an urgent meeting with the king. The message was to be delivered as a priority requiring immediate attention. William paced his office while preparations were made. His usually calm demeanor showed visible cracks of anger and frustration. He had spent years managing family tension and public crises tied to his brother. This hidden meeting felt like a breach of trust. Within 30 minutes, William left for Windsor Castle. His security team hurried to prepare vehicles and coordinate with palace protection. The drive passed in heavy silence as William stared out the window, his thoughts racing through consequences and possibilities. He reflected on countless discussions about family loyalty and institutional stability. Those conversations now felt hollow given his father's choice to meet Harry privately. Upon arrival at Windsor Castle, William moved quickly through corridors toward his father's private apartments. Staff stepped aside and avoided eye contact as the Prince of Wales passed, anger clearly radiating from his posture. His protection officer followed at a respectful distance. William reached the door to his father's study and entered without knocking or waiting for permission. King Charles looked up from his desk with an expression blending guilt and resignation. He had clearly anticipated this confrontation. William demanded to know why he had been excluded from a meeting involving his brother and family affairs. Charles attempted to explain his reasoning about allowing space for private dialogue without the complications of sibling rivalry. William refused to accept it. He interrupted his father, stating that he deserved transparency about matters affecting the entire family. The king defended his choice, arguing that William's presence would have altered the dynamic of the discussion with Harry. He needed the chance to speak with his younger son without Harry feeling cornered or pressured by his older brother. Charles insisted the meeting focused on practical issues and did not undermine William's position. Still, the explanations failed to ease William's anger. William argued that secret meetings created exactly the instability the family could not afford. The institution required unified leadership and clear communication. Harry had abandoned royal duties and caused enough disruption through public criticism of the family, and allowing him to re-enter private negotiations without openness set a dangerous example. Charles needed to understand that his responsibilities as king meant personal feelings as a father could not outweigh institutional obligations. The argument intensified as both men held firm. Charles accused William of being overly rigid and unforgiving. William countered that his father was allowing guilt and emotion to cloud judgment. The exchange exposed deep divisions over how to manage Harry's complicated relationship with the family. Years of pent-up frustrations spilled out in sharp words neither would normally use. Eventually, both men lowered their voices and tried to return to reason. Charles explained specific topics discussed with Harry. He outlined legal and financial matters that required attention regardless of personal feelings. William acknowledged those practical needs, but insisted on being included in all future discussions. He would not accept being excluded from decisions affecting the monarchy's future. Charles agreed to improved communication going forward, while maintaining that his actions had been appropriate given the sensitivity of the situation. William accepted the partial concession but remained visibly dissatisfied. The king reassured his heir that nothing discussed with Harry threatened William's position or Catherine's role. The focus had been on workable arrangements that served everyone without forcing reconciliation. William asked directly whether Harry was still staying somewhere in the castle. Charles confirmed that his younger son remained in guest quarters. Unable to restrain himself, William insisted on speaking with Harry before any further talks occurred. Charles hesitated, but ultimately agreed that a conversation between the brothers might be necessary. He cautioned William to approach it calmly rather than aggressively. The Prince of Wales left his father's study and headed toward the guest wing. His anger hardened into cold resolve. He needed to understand Harry's intentions and make it clear that any renewed involvement with the family would occur on terms protecting the institution. William prepared himself for a difficult exchange that would further test the already strained bond between the brothers. Meghan receives the news. Meghan woke in her Montecito bedroom to sunlight streaming through the curtains. She instinctively reached for her phone on the nightstand. The screen displayed numerous missed alerts and messages. Her eyes locked onto a headline from a British tabloid. Palace sources confirm Prince Harry secretly returns to Windsor Castle. The timestamp showed the story had broken 30 minutes earlier. Meghan sat upright as her heart began to race. She quickly scrolled through multiple news sites, all publishing variations of the same report. Anonymous palace sources claimed Harry had arrived at Windsor Castle late the night before for an unannounced meeting with King Charles. The stories speculated about reconciliation efforts and private family business. None mentioned Meghan or suggested she had traveled with her husband. She immediately called Harry's phone. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again with the same result. She sent several text messages demanding an explanation. The messages showed delivered, but no reply came. She checked the time difference and realized Harry should have been awake regardless of meetings. His silence felt intentional rather than accidental. Meghan got out of bed and paced the room. She replayed their last conversation in her mind. Harry had mentioned business matters needing attention, but offered no details. He had seemed distracted and evasive when she asked questions. She had assumed his mood was due to stress, not secret plans. Realizing he had traveled to England without telling her made her stomach drop. She called repeatedly, reaching only voicemail. Meghan left a message, forcing calm into her voice. She asked Harry to contact her immediately no matter what meetings he was in. The controlled tone barely masked growing anger and fear. She ended the call and stared at her phone, waiting for it to ring. More alerts appeared as news outlets added details. Each version highlighted Meghan's absence as notable and suspicious. Frustrated, she called her closest friend and advisor, who answered immediately. Meghan rushed through the explanation, words tumbling out. Her friend, already aware of the reports, shared her shock at the secret trip. They discussed possible motives while Meghan continued checking her phone. The conversation offered little comfort. Meghan opened her laptop and searched for every available detail about Harry's movements. She found no flight records or travel data indicating when he had left California. The planning must have happened days earlier without her knowledge. She replayed recent interactions, searching for missed signs. Harry had seemed distracted, but not openly deceptive. Realizing how completely he had hidden his plans felt like a physical blow. Meghan briefly considered contacting palace officials directly, but knew it would only worsen matters. Her relationship with King Charles was strained at best. Calling Windsor Castle would look desperate and would certainly leak to the press. She forced herself to wait despite every instinct urging action. Messages arrived from friends and associates asking for comment. Meghan ignored them. She drafted and deleted multiple texts to Harry, swinging between anger and controlled restraint. None expressed what she truly needed to say. The sense of betrayal clashed with concern over any agreements he might be making without her involvement. Her phone finally rang just after 9:00 a.m. California time. Harry's name appeared on the screen. Meghan answered immediately, but his voice sounded wrong. He sounded exhausted and tense. He began by apologizing for not contacting her sooner. His explanation was rushed and defensive. He said the meeting with his father had been urgent and unavoidable. Charles had demanded complete secrecy for security and privacy reasons. Meghan interrupted, asking why Harry had not trusted her enough to tell her about his travel. Harry claimed everything had come together too quickly for discussion. Meghan rejected that explanation, pointing out that international travel required planning. Harry admitted he had known about the meeting for several days, but believed telling her would only lead to conflict. The admission hung between them. Meghan felt her anger harden into something colder. She asked what specific topics he and Charles had discussed. Harry gave vague answers about estate issues and scheduling. Meghan pressed for clarity on any commitments or agreements. Harry insisted nothing was finalized and everything remained open. Meghan stated firmly that they needed to talk face-to-face immediately. Harry mentioned another difficult conversation ahead with William. Meghan insisted that whatever family conflict he had entered could wait until after he spoke with his wife. Her tone left no room for negotiation. Harry agreed to call back within a few hours to arrange a video conference. The call ended with Meghan standing alone in her bedroom, holding a phone that felt like proof of betrayal. She looked around at the costly furniture and carefully styled room. Everything symbolized the life they had built together away from royal control. Harry's secret return to Windsor Castle threatened the very base of that independence. Meghan began preparing mentally for a confrontation that would decide the future of their partnership, the confrontation between brothers. William moved through the quiet corridors leading to the guest quarters at Windsor Castle. His footsteps echoed against stone walls that had witnessed centuries of family disputes. He passed portraits of ancestors whose faces seemed to judge him as he walked. His security officer followed several steps behind, keeping a professional distance. William's jaw stayed locked tight as he approached the door where staff had confirmed Harry was staying. He knocked firmly and waited. Shuffling noises came from inside. The door opened to reveal Harry in casual clothes, his hair uncombed. Surprise and exhaustion crossed his face when he saw William standing there. Neither brother spoke at first. The silence grew heavy and uncomfortable between them. Finally, Harry stepped aside and motioned for William to come in. William entered the guest suite and scanned the room. Harry's bag sat half unpacked on a chair. Papers and documents covered the small desk. Coffee cups and water glasses cluttered the side table. The room carried the temporary feel of someone who had never planned to stay long. William stayed near the door as Harry closed it carefully. Harry tried to speak, but William raised his hand to stop him. The Prince of Wales said he needed to understand exactly what Harry thought he was doing. Harry had left royal life behind and had made that decision dramatically public. He had given interviews criticizing the family and released accounts that damaged reputations. Now he had returned to Windsor Castle in secret, as if none of that history mattered. Harry defended himself by saying their father had invited him. King Charles had requested the meeting and handled all security arrangements. Harry had simply answered a direct request from the reigning monarch. He had every right to meet privately with his own father regardless of William's feelings. The defensive edge in his voice showed his own uncertainty. William challenged the idea that anything involving Harry could stay truly private. The secret had already reached the press within hours. Staff knew about the visit. Palace officials were scrambling to control the narrative. Harry's presence created instant complications affecting the entire family. His belief that he could come and go unnoticed showed either striking naivety or total disregard for consequences. Harry argued that William had no authority to control his relationships with other family members. He was tired of his older brother acting as a gatekeeper over family involvement. William had spent years excluding him from important discussions and decisions. Now William complained when Harry found his own way back to communication with their father. William's face reddened with anger at this claim. He pointed out that Harry had chosen to leave and had done so in the most destructive way possible. The entire family had endured public humiliation because Harry chose to air grievances. Catherine had faced cruel attacks fueled by information Harry shared with the media. The institution had survived intense criticism during a period of transition. All of that damage came directly from Harry's actions. Harry fired back that William had never tried to understand his perspective or the pressures that pushed him away. William had been too focused on protecting the institution to protect family members. He had stood by while palace officials briefed against Meghan and had done nothing to defend Harry's wife. That protection only came after Harry had already chosen to leave. William demanded to know what Harry hoped to gain from this secret visit. Did he truly believe he could negotiate some hybrid role where he kept his California life while benefiting from royal connections? The family had moved forward in his absence. Catherine had taken on greater responsibility. Other working royals had filled the gaps. There was no open space for Harry to return whenever he wished. Harry insisted he had no plan to resume royal duties or move back to England. The meeting with Charles had focused on specific legal and financial matters that needed attention. He had rights and interests regardless of where he lived. William could not erase him from family structures simply because his presence was inconvenient. Harry reminded William that he was also the king's son. No matter what William wanted, that fact remained. The argument intensified as both brothers raised their voices. William accused Harry of wanting the benefits of both worlds. Harry replied that William had always resented sharing attention or importance. The exchange collapsed into childhood resentments and old grievances. Years of buried anger spilled out in accusations neither could undo. William eventually stopped and took a deep breath. He said coldly that Harry needed to make a clear choice. Either fully commit to the working royal family with all the duties and limits involved, or accept being permanently outside the institution. There could be no middle ground that allowed independence while keeping privileges. William would not allow his brother to threaten the monarchy's stability for personal comfort. Harry answered that William had no right to issue ultimatums. Their father was king and would decide family structure. William was only the heir and needed to remember that. Harry would continue his relationship with Charles regardless of William's approval. The cold finality in his tone made it clear the conversation was over. William stared at his brother for a long moment, recognizing the familiar stubborn look that meant Harry would not give in. Without another word, he turned and left. Meghan becomes furious. Harry sat in a plain room at Windsor Castle, white walls visible behind him, setting up the promised video call. After several rings, the connection finally went through. Harry's face appeared on Meghan's screen, looking worn and drained. Meghan stared back from her home office in Montecito. Her expression stayed controlled, but her eyes burned with barely contained anger. Harry began with another apology. He explained he had been pulled into non-stop difficult conversations all day. The meeting with his father had lasted far longer than expected. Then William had arrived demanding answers. Everything had spiraled far beyond what Harry imagined when he agreed to the trip. His voice carried a pleading tone, hoping for understanding. Meghan let him finish before speaking in a measured voice. She said she needed clarity on the timeline. When had Harry first learned about the meeting with King Charles? Harry admitted the initial contact had come nearly 2 weeks earlier. A private secretary had reached out asking him to return to England for urgent family business. Harry had agreed but had been sworn to total secrecy about the timing and purpose. Meghan's composure cracked. She asked him to repeat what he had said. 2 weeks. He had known for 2 weeks and had told his wife nothing. Harry tried to explain that his father had insisted on complete confidentiality. The king did not want publicity or interference in what needed to be a private discussion. Harry said he felt obligated to respect that request. Meghan cut him off, reminding him she was not outside interference. She was his wife and partner in every decision affecting their family. Keeping the trip secret was a fundamental violation of their marriage. They had promised to act as a united team, especially in matters involving the royal family. Harry had broken that promise at the most basic level. Harry argued that secrecy had been necessary to make the meeting happen. If Meghan had known, she would have tried to stop him. She would have raised objections and arguments that made everything harder. He had tried to avoid conflict by handling it quietly. He planned to explain everything after returning home. Meghan's anger burst through. She asked how excluding her from major decisions could possibly be called avoiding conflict. The conflict existed now precisely because he had lied by omission. Harry's belief that she would oppose the trip showed the real issue. He knew she would object, so he went behind her back instead of being honest. Harry tried to shift focus to what had been discussed. Legal documents needed signatures. Estate planning affecting their children's futures had been addressed. Financial arrangements tied to long-term security were reviewed. These were serious matters that could not be delayed or handled remotely. Meghan demanded specifics. Had he signed anything committing them to future obligations? Harry hesitated, then admitted he had signed some papers, but claimed they were procedural and would not change their lifestyle or require royal duties. Meghan ordered him to email copies immediately. Harry promised he would, but said he did not have digital versions ready. Meghan questioned what Charles truly wanted. She suspected the meeting was designed to emotionally manipulate Harry while he was isolated from support. Charles knew how to use guilt and duty. Harry was vulnerable to that pressure without Meghan present to challenge it. Harry insisted his father had been reasonable and direct. Charles had presented practical issues, not manipulation. Harry's defense of his father only deepened Meghan's belief that the influence had already worked. Meghan asked about the confrontation with William. Harry described the argument and William's ultimatum. Meghan seized on that detail, saying it proved exactly why secret meetings were dangerous. Harry had walked into a situation where family members could corner him and push decisions without outside input. Harry became defensive, saying no one had forced him into anything. He was capable of resisting pressure and making his own choices. Meghan's suggestion that he could be manipulated felt insulting. He had handled every conversation without giving in. His family did not control him. Meghan replied sharply that his actions proved otherwise. He had hidden the trip because he knew she would question it. He met his father alone. He signed documents without legal review. Every decision showed the vulnerability she had warned about. Harry accused Meghan of trying to isolate him from his family. Would she prefer he never speak to his father or brother again? That was not healthy and not what he wanted. He needed balance between marriage and family. Meghan responded coldly that Harry created the crisis through dishonesty. She had never demanded he avoid his family. She required transparency and partnership. Harry failed that test. Now she had to decide whether she could trust him or whether his loyalty to the royal family would always come first. The accusation hung between them. Harry looked shaken as he realized the depth of her pain. He tried to reassure her that she and the children came first. Meghan stopped him. She needed time to think without excuses. She would talk again when he returned to California. The call ended abruptly as Meghan closed her laptop. The situation raised serious questions about Harry's future relationship with the royal family. Could he maintain meaningful ties while living permanently in California? Would Meghan accept any arrangement involving regular contact with Windsor Castle? How would Charles balance being both father and king? The answers remained uncertain as everyone stepped back to process what had happened. The secret return to Windsor Castle resolved nothing and exposed tensions meant to stay private. Harry faced consequences for hiding the truth from Meghan. William faced ongoing conflict with a brother who refused to choose a single path. Charles faced the reality that his son's relationship might be damaged beyond repair. The effects of one night would echo for months. Do you think Harry should have attended the meeting with his father in the first place? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Before you leave, watch the other videos on your screen.